What's your never again story? Story 1. Sleep with multiple coworkers/supervisors within the same job. Only 3. We all know for the most part, humans can't keep their mouths shut. So once it got out, I slept with X, Y, and Z at my job I had throughout college. I was gossiped about so much and called the UPS slut behind closed doors. To make matters slightly worse, the men I slept with were all supervisors. So you know they thought I only did it to advance in the job. My good friend who worked with me, didn't sleep with him, haha, showed me a group chat with the guys in our work section and showed all the hateful things said about me, and one coworker even threatened to rape me if he made a move on me, and I rejected him. I didn't quit, but after my friend showed me those messages, I stopped talking to virtually everyone at my job except him, and I cut ties with the 3 I had relations with. I had to move my work area and everything. Let this be a lesson. Don't sleep with people at your job, unless you are dating them, even if it is just a one-night thing. 2 of them were a one-time thing, but 1, it was a mutual FWB. I am responsible for my actions, and I'm not playing the victim at all. I was mostly disappointed at my one coworkers who said he'd rape me if I reject his advances. Also, I did report him and he got fired. Next story. Third chances. If someone hurts you in the same way twice, let them go and wish them well. I gave my brother so many chances to get his shit together. I hope he gets better and stops fucking people over, but I don't want him in my life anymore after everything he has done. Every year or so, he begs for my forgiveness and swears he has changed. I always tell him the same thing. I forgive you, but I don't want you in my life anymore. A couple months after, I see the news article of his arrest for the same crimes he had committed probably over 100 times. Every single time. I hope he changes. I really do. But I won't trust him again. Third chances rarely, if ever, are the chance people take to change. So I don't give people third chances anymore. And you know what? My life has been so much better ever since. Let love persuade me to stay in an unhealthy relationship. Try to keep a relationship going after being cheated on because others, our friends and his family, love us together. If the love and respect were real, he'd have never started a relationship with another woman while living together. Pre- and post-relationship, these seem like a no-brainer. It's amazing what you'll do when you're actually in the situation. His mom and grandmother would call me his future wife during service while him and his new girlfriend sat in the back of the church. It truly was a toxic relationship. Also, we'll never buy a brand new vehicle again. Next story. Lived in a house full of people, who I knew okay when I moved in, but then they moved out and strangers moved in. We had shared kitchens and bathrooms, but our own rooms and furniture/dishes/whatever. The roommates would often host parties at the last minute that went until the time I had to be awake for work. They also broke my furniture because they wanted to jump on the furniture and dance, and they didn't tell me. They ruined my pots and pans, ate my food, and left their food in the pan, on the stove, to rot for weeks. After only 6 months of living there, I thought, never again will I live with a bunch of strangers in a shared house. And I never did again, and I am much happier for it. Next story. Childbirth for sure. Not much of a story, though. I have 2 children. My pregnancies were okay. My deliveries were fine. My second child didn't sleep for like 3 years, though, and there's not a single fucking chance I'm doing that again. I don't remember a whole lot about 2010 to 2013, and that's an awful long time to forget about when you're not an addict. Sleep deprivation can suck my ass. I'll also never get another inner conch piercing. Hurt like a mother, and didn't heal completely in the couple of years I had it. I eventually took it out because it was still very painful years after the fact. Next story. Force my husband to befriend someone who is shitty because husband is a good influence. He ended up upset with me and surprise. Shitty guy stayed shitty. A gal I knew S had mentioned to me her husband, B, was having a hard time with no good male influences in his life. I was like, dude, my husband is a great guy, moral compass off the charts, and forced husband to hang with B a few times. B eventually cheated on his wife again, and husband and I both felt icky being around them. The entire group of friends S and I shared stopped hanging with me not long afterwards, and husband finally shared with me that he was angry I pushed the friendship on him. This was when we started realizing that couples our age, 2023, were generally not in healthy relationships, and we stopped altogether trying to make couple friends. Next story. Dating guys that were too prideful for self-care/mental health therapy. First was depression. Second was anxiety. Both are in medicine, and were so engrossed in their value as a person being defined by their image and career. I was patient and constantly encouraging them to be more kind and accepting toward themselves, because my sister had anxiety/depression, and I understand the biopsychosocial model of mental health, and I understand the medical field and toxic masculinity and whatnot. When they told me that they didn't want to work on themselves, their mood, then I knew it was time to go. It's not anybody's fault that they have mental health conditions, but it's how they choose to manifest their condition is important. A condition is an explanation and not a license to behave in cruel ways. Next story. My ex was fucking insane. He'd get mad at me for not being in the mood to have sex and then try to guilt trip me into it. He didn't let me drink when I was out with my friends. BC, his mother was an alcoholic. He didn't let me go out with my friends on weekends. BC, he wanted me to stay in with him, even if he had no plans for us. If I went anywhere, I had to tell him where I was, who I was going with, and when I'd get back. Yet he was allowed to go out and get high with his high school dropout friends. Sometimes he wouldn't come home for 2 days straight, and to top it all off, 99% of the time he didn't even bother telling me where he was. And when I pointed out the hypocrisy, he'd call me a crazy bitch. He'd get mad at me over every little thing. He was by far the most overly sensitive person I have ever met, and it was so annoying having to console him and apologize for shit I didn't even do, just so he'd stop being mad. I put up with this absolute bullshit for almost 2 full years. Broke up with him the month before our second anniversary, and he was literally begging me to take him back, promising he'd change, and me being the idiot I was, did. 1.5 weeks went by. Nothing changed, and I dumped him again. He cried to me for hours while I was breaking up WM. I have not shed a single tear over that monster. Fuck him. I will never date a horribly controlling and forceful guy ever again. Next story. Jin. Never again. Never will I allow a superior to sexually harass me and touch me and make me uncomfortable again. Just because I'm female, you think it is okay to tell me that the only way I will move up is if I suck your dick. Nope, not going to happen. Then there was the time you pushed me down and got on top of me and held me down while I tried to kick you off of me and get away. Also, why did I come back to this pace when you fired me before, over 2 other employees getting mad at each other and me not stopping it when that is not my responsibility? And then you threatened that if you ever saw me again that you would smash my face into the sidewalk to the point that even my husband wouldn't recognize me. I had to apologize to you? Why did I do that? Why? Was working here the only option for me? Why did I go back? I ask myself this all the time. I've been away for years now, and every time I think about it, I regret and hate myself. Never will I put myself in this situation again. 8 years was enough. You are a piece of shit. Sorry, had to get that off my chest. Next story. Buying a live Christmas tree. My husband and I are newly married. In our new house, decide to get a live Christmas tree as we have only had fake ones. Cue us buying the saddest, lumpiest, patchiest tree in the Marsh parking lot. We decorated her in purple and pink lights, stuck a bunch of weird Adventure Time and Nightmare Before Christmas ornaments, and wired a plastic seahorse to the top as the star, because we didn't have one, nor find one that we liked. We lovingly named her Lumpy Space Princess due to her awkward and curvy shape. We also didn't ever water her, as again, we had never had a live tree. When it came around in mid-January that we had to get her giant ass out of our living room, my husband in his infinite wisdom made a decision that I would not endorse now or ever, and dragged her dry, lumpy tree ass through not 1, not 2, but 3 doorways, and sent pine needles, dried to knife-sharp points, everywhere. They were in my washer, the closed doorway of the dryer, stuck in the carpets and in the clothes, under our bed that the tree was nowhere near, just piles and piles of needles all over. We clogged one hose of a shop vac and the tank of another, and to this day, I am still vacuuming up pine needles from LSP. Y'all, I laughed till I cried, and with every laugh my husband got madder and madder, but it was just so ridiculous I couldn't stop. I am howling. And it was just insane how big of a mess it was. So yeah, fake trees for life! Next story. Walking my cat on a leash in the backyard. She made this unearthly yowling noise while running in circles at the very end of the leash. Then she latched onto a chain-link fence and tried to climb into the neighbor's yard. When I pulled her off of that, she latched onto my shoulder. At some point, possibly when I was pulling her off the fence, her little claw started bleeding, so there's blood on my shirt from her, and I'm bleeding from her scratches, and my boyfriend had to come save me. She's so energetic, and I thought she would love to have a little romp outside. I came in and cried because she got hurt. Never again. She's an indoor BB. Next story. At 18-19, I dated a guy several years older than me. He loved to bring up how he was older than me, and he managed to get through freshman year without gaining weight while I was clearly not doing the same. Mind you, he should have been in a size large t-shirt, but squeezed himself into medium like an overstuffed sausage. I digress. He was in a fraternity, but very obviously they didn't really want him there. Some things that should have made me leave, but didn't. Me saying no, and him continuing to rape me because he loved me. Him constantly criticizing my weight. Him not washing his hands after using the bathroom and arguing with me about it. The fact he was constantly lamenting about some Asian girl he once dated who got married right after they broke up. Funny thing is, I also married my next boyfriend. But the reason why I'm sharing this story here is he lived with his mother and stepfather, who he treated like absolute shit despite living in their home. I left college for reasons after freshman year, and he wanted to move to my hometown. So I found him a place to live with a friend of mine. I paid his rent until he found a job. I looked for jobs for him, let him borrow my computer, drove him to interviews. I want to day this went on for 2 months, when finally I just had enough and realized, despite all he said, and the big macho act about how he needs to be the man of the house, what he really wanted was a mommy. He was enjoying being taken care of and not having to work and didn't want it to change. I asked him about it, and surprisingly, he was honest. Broke up right there and then. Broke up. Next story. I dated a guy that lived 60 miles away from me. He hardly ever came to see me and constantly complained about the long drive. He didn't want me to visit him or pick him up from the train. He could go from hours to days without contacting me, saying he was so busy with work. He worked part-time at a pizza place. But he had me so convinced that he loved me, and we were meant to be together. He had me wrapped around his finger. I'd believe any bullshit excuse he could come up with for why he couldn't come see me. This went on for 2 years. Yep, I'm that kind of stupid. Spoiler. He was seeing a girl he told me not to worry about the entire time, even living with her for most of it. They're married now. A couple of months later, I started dating a guy that also lived about 60 miles away from me. Same area, around our state capital. On our first date, he drove 60 miles to pick me up. Took me 45 miles back to the capital city for an art festival. 45 miles to drive me back home. By this point, it's around midnight. He held my hand while I slept in the car on the way back. He then drove 60 miles back to his house and had to be to work at 5 in the morning. We've now been dating 2 years and have been living together for 1 year. He had 4 jobs when I met him, and he still never complained about the drive to see me. He always answered my texts and calls. There were times he'd make the drive up, and we would just go straight to sleep, only for him to leave at 4 in the morning to get to work on time. We did this multiple times a week for a year before we moved in together. I love telling this story because it's the perfect example of, if he wants to see you, he'll see you. Next story. Yes! Never again. I had this guy pick me up and he put my address into his GPS. The date went well enough, but he was just coming on a bit too strongly, relationship-wise. The next day, he texted me in a complete panic saying his GPS had crashed and he lost my address. Thank the tech gods. I wasn't sure at that point if I wanted to see him again. I'm more decisive now. So I resisted, but he kept pestering me. I eventually gave in, so naive, but gave him an address a few doors down. He then started buying me things off Amazon, and my neighbors had to drop off the packages. And yes, I did at that point have to tell him we weren't right for each other. Next story. I had a date a while back, chicken, out of meeting me at a restaurant. Instead, at the last minute, she texts me and asks to meet up in the most remote part of our city. It's a sand spit, with 1 road on and 1 road off. No houses, businesses, or street lighting. I'd only known this girl through a 15-minute conversation at a bar a few days earlier. I thought, well, I'm getting robbed tonight. Met up with her, and found her sitting on her car in the dark smoking a GA. She gets up enough courage and we head out to a bar for a drink. Once back in public, I asked her, "Don't you think it was a little risky meeting a guy you don't know in the middle of nowhere?" Her eyes got really wide, and she explained she hadn't dated in a long time since her divorce. Couldn't believe how risky that was. I even called a buddy and told him if I didn't text him within the hour to call the cops, lol. Next story. I went on a first date with a guy I knew via friends. Was a pretty cool date, but I got weird vibes. He was a little bit too domineering for my taste, making fun of me and being slightly pushy about where we went and what we did, like ordering my burger for me without onions. He didn't like them, I guess, but he never asked me. Made out with him anyway. Why? And went home. He wanted to meet up the following week, and I said yes. I asked if he wanted to go out for coffee, and he acted pouty. Said he'd expected to be invited to my house. Why? Well, when I really click with someone, I like to see their home. I told him that this was a little too soon for me, and I'd rather meet up somewhere, and he went nuclear. Said I was stuck up and distrustful and a prude. He was sorry for wasting his time with me, and what did I think dating was for if I didn't want to have sex? I quickly cut him off and laughed with my friends that evening about the fact that he threw such a fit. But it made me feel really uncomfortable and weird. It wasn't really funny at all. I guess I dodged a bullet there. I still follow him on Facebook for some reason, and he's always posting woke shit like he's the most enlightened scholar in the world. All of this feminist stuff. Isn't it weird how sometimes very vocally woke men are actually such creeps in real life? Next story. My mom and her coworker decided that their awesome single kids should go on a date. He picked me up in a sports car that drove stick shift and then proceeded to drive like over 100 miles per hour on side streets, whilst jerking to a stop at every light. It was a blind date. I assumed dinner would be involved. It wasn't. He drove me to his place and said he planned on baking cookies, which he had basically pre-made cookie dough from the store. He then tried to corner me into his room by giving me a tour of his place, and he actually picked me up and threw me on the bed. He was really tall and overpowered me. Next, he tried to make moves on me, rather aggressively, until I asked him to take me home. Sadly, no Uber back then. He then drove like a terrorist speed racer all the way back. When I got home, I was having quite the panic attack. From then on, I always drove myself so I wouldn't get trapped again. Next story. Warning, I'm about to describe poop in great detail. My never again is taking pain meds without a stool softener and lots of water. I had a major surgery and had a lot of pain afterwards. And they had me on Valium with the Percocet because they didn't want me moving around. Cervical spine fusion. I happily ate Percocets and Valiums for several days, and since everything was a blur, I didn't notice that I hadn't shit. I had been eating too. Not a lot, but I was definitely putting stuff in the pipeline. After a few days, I slowed down the meds and started coming out of the funk, and I got uncomfortable. I thought it would work itself out, and I began drinking water and taking stool softeners. I don't remember how many more days it was before I finally just had to shit. Like I was blocked up so bad. It hurt. I tried unsuccessfully, but, well, there was a log creating a dam, if you know what I mean. Finally decided I couldn't take it anymore. I crammed an enema in and squeezed it in. My bowels began to move. Problem was, I really did have a blockage, so when the enema stimulated everything to move, it was just backed up in me. My God, I have never hurt like that. I was trembling, sweating, crying, on the verge of puking. I collapsed onto the bathroom floor, and as I pushed myself off the floor, I heard myself mutter, "Mommy," like completely involuntarily called for my mommy. I was 33 or 34 years old at the time. So anyway, I finally scraped enough shit out of the way that I was able to poop out the ducking softball-sized stool that was holding up traffic, and things improved. I didn't shit without wincing for a week, and if I take so much as one pain pill, I eat stool softeners and water. Never again.